Hello, everybody. This is Empowering Democracy. I'm your host, Joe Firestone. What I planned for tonight is to talk about Project 2025. The topic is Project 2025 Redux, and its implications. And I will talk about that. But first, I have something to say about the actions of the university presidents, the actions of congresspeople, the actions of the governments at all levels, and the actions of the police. What's very clear from many campuses, hey, Steve Wolfbrand, is that these authorities of various kinds are conspiring to and have been violating the civil liberties of the protesters, most of whom are overwhelmingly peaceful and whose encampments are there to facilitate the exercise of the free speech and free assembly rights of the protesters. Now, what's been going on in this country for many years now, and for a moment I'll hearken back to the Vietnam War and the violations of civil liberties that took place during that time in response to the demonstrations. That was widespread, and it was among the most bitterly divisive times we've had, in the United States. Following those disorders, which in turn followed the civil rights movements and the violations of the civil rights of protesters there, we had a period, in the United States, which is something of a quiet period, where we didn't see much in the way of violations of civil liberties of those exercising their rights to free speech and free assembly and free press here in the United States. But then in the early 1990s, when people began to contest some of the trade agreements, that were coming out at that time, and began to exercise their rights of free speech and free assembly with respect to the trade agreements, the actions of the World Bank, the actions of the G7, the conflicts over international treaties that were going on, we saw the emergence of the police once more and their violations of the civil liberties, of people. And we've been seeing that once again from that time on. We've seen local Democratic mayors, and Democratic governors being just as guilty of these violations of civil liberties as the authorities who belong to the Republican Party were. It was a bipartisan thing. It wasn't restricted, to the Republicans. The governments and their police forces grew used to violating the civil liberties of Americans. They've been doing it now for more than 30 years with impunity, and people have been doing nothing about it. This has continued and accelerated in the campus protests that we are now seeing. It's not something that's emerged overnight. The violations of civil liberties have been in place for a very, very long time. In the midst of the hypocrisy of claiming that the United States is a democratic society, we've constantly seen this kind of response to exercise of free speech and free assembly rights that we're seeing now. This is a disgrace for the United States, but more than that, it simply is a denial of democracy. Now, we all know that I'm not one to say that we have a democracy. I've been talking for a long time about the idea that we are an inverted totalitarian system, okay, and not a democracy. But for those who insist that we are still, okay, a democracy, for those who insist that in spite of the imperfections, we are, okay, a democratic nation, and this is what distinguishes us from many, many other nations around, okay, the world. The actions of our police, our state and local police, actually, more than our federal police, whenever any sort of demonstration or protest with any decent number of people breaks out, there are police who appear and who violate the civil liberties of the protesters. It's been going on in Washington, D.C. for ages, of course, but the police here in Washington, D.C. are generally more gentle than the police, okay, in other areas. The actions of the New York City police are outrageous. The actions of the Texas police have been outrageous. The actions of the police in Southern California have been outrageous at various times and outrageous now. Generally speaking, the people of the United States have let this pass by. They have not recognized this as the threat to democracy, as the proof that we don't have a democracy that it is. The people of the United States have brushed off that kind of behavior of the police. Of course, we recently had the George Floyd protests, and we saw the violations of civil liberties there as well. People getting brutalized by the police all over the country. Of course, that was in the Trump administration. Then we had federal police appearing in unmarked cars, kidnapping people off the streets, taking them God knows where. We saw that happening in Portland, Oregon. We haven't seen that yet in terms of the movements we're seeing now, but we are seeing wholesale violations of civil liberties. If we're to have any claim at all of having a democracy, these have to stop. And they have to stop now. And we have to recognize them for the danger they are to all of us. If they can brutalize the students, okay, with impunity, they can brutalize any of us. I call for the families and parents of the students, okay, to unite and to sue the hell out of all the cities, all the local governments, and all the universities that have been acting this way. Sue them for violations of the First Amendment. Sue them for punitive damages. Sue them for physical damages to the protesters who have been largely peaceful. Collect where it hurts in the pocketbook. Don't let them get away with this behavior. This behavior cannot stand. So that's my message, okay, on that. Of course, I'm enraged by it, but my rage is not important. What's important is just that they are breaking the Constitution again, that the Constitution is constantly broken by our governments. It means little these days. We have to consider that a serious offense, serious violations by the people who are supposedly our governors by law. We are increasingly seeing it's all bullshit. In one California city, I forget which, I saw. I saw a video of very briefly about 6:30 or so. I saw this video of protesters in California who were getting attacked by Zionist thugs and police just standing by, just allowing it to happen. Peaceful protesters and the police facilitating attacks by the Zionists, using weapons that can seriously injure people, attacking the peaceful protesters, and the police, the lawless police, simply standing by. We badly need to clean out these police forces. We badly need to have the lawsuits I talked about. There's more than one way to defund, the police. This way of defunding them through lawsuits may prove to be a most effective way of getting them to stop this behavior. It just is unacceptable, in a democracy. Brandy says, and fireworks that can cause major burns. Yes. They're breaking bones out there. This has got to stop. Maybe the only way to stop it is for more people to get out there and to join them. Just have such a showing of popular support for the right to protest, for the right to demonstrate, for the right to free speech, and free assembly, that the cops are simply overwhelmed. That should be done, and the legal actions should be taken so that police forces all over the country are under attack for this kind of behavior. It has to stop. Steve Wolfbrand says, seems only a matter of time before people wind up dead. Yeah, it's just a matter of a very short time till we have another Kent State type of incident. We can all see it coming. We all know it's coming. The cops know it's coming too. They're hoping that's going to shut everybody up. We have to show them there's no way to shut people up who want to end the genocide. There's no way to shut up people looking for justice. That is what we need to make clear to all the authorities. And we need to make this the death knell for the election campaign of Joe Biden. He needs to be forced to resign as president of the United States. He's as responsible for the genocide as Bibi Netanyahu is. He has the power to stop those weapons from getting there. He has the power to stop the attack on Rafah. right now. We have to make clear he's out, he's gone, he's lost. And we have to make clear that Trump is gone as well and that he's lost, because anybody who thinks that Trump would have acted differently in this particular situation is only deluding themselves. I mean, Trump's son in law is looking for real estate properties on the Gaza beaches, for God's sake. Anyway, I was asked by Lana Dell, who, by the way, is not here right now. I was asked by Lana to do a show on Project 2025. I did one in the fall, of last year. There wasn't much of a reaction to it. But of course, things are getting closer, so it seemed time to do another show on Project 25 and what it is, and what's involved. So I'm going to do a repeat of one of the articles I covered last fall, and then I'm going to go over, a more recent article to make everybody aware. Oh, Brandy, to make everybody aware, of what is involved. Brandy says, Joe, I would like to hear your interpretation of the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act when you get time. I'm sorry, I haven't been paying attention to that act, Brandy, but I'm going to guess that the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act, is an act that was put in by some bought congressperson, bought, by AIPAC, that it has language that defines anti-Semitism the same way Bibi Netanyahu defines it, so that it carries a false definition, of anti-Semitism that amounts to any kind of criticism of Israel, any kind of defense of Palestinian rights. I'm sure it's an act that contains within it the conflation of Zionism with Judaism. And as someone who's Jewish, I reject and refute that act. If I'm wrong about it, since I don't know the language of the act, I will take back this particular condemnation. But in the present climate, something known as an Anti-Semitism Awareness Act has got to be that kind of act bought by AIPAC and providing a definition of anti-Semitism that is just a logical conflation of Judaism with Zionism. And I reject that conflation in whole or in part. There is no identity between Judaism, and anti-Semitism. I'm going to say something now that may seem extreme, and controversial. But from my point of view, the Jews of Israel supporting this campaign against, the Gazans are no longer Jews. They're not practicing Judaism right now. What they're practicing is a form, of Nazism. Brandy says, I put the bill link in the Facebook chat. Thank you, Brandy. But I'm not going to go over the bill now. I'm going to go back to Project 2025. So I'll share the first article from the American Prospect about Project 2025, and I'll go over that. Okay, you should be seeing the article, but instead you're seeing what appear to be a bunch of ads. So I'm sorry about that. Why this ad? Because it's getting in the fucking way. Sorry. As you know, I normally do not cuss during these streams. I'm normally patient and measured. Stop seeing this ad. Why this ad? Oh, come on. This is nonsense. I will stop this nonsense and get on with this. Okay, this article was it written by the Prospect staff or Dave Dan? No, by Harold Meyerson on November 27th, 2023. Title of the article is The Blueprint. The far right has a plan to remake America. They even wrote it down. This is November 27th, 2023. Harold Morrison, who's always been the labor guy at the American Prospect, says, it's not like we haven't been warned. Should the Republican presidential nominee, likely Donald Trump, win the election next year, conservatives have been pretty clear about what they intend to do. In fact, explicitly clear. Trump himself isn't much on policy, of course. 2020 Republican National Convention was notable chiefly because at his behest, it made no effort to pass a party platform, effectively giving Trump carte blanche for whatever he wished to do during his second term. But Trump's all too personal vision for a second term agenda is now leaking into the press. According to stories in the New York Times and the Washington Post, it begins with transforming the Justice Department into an instrument of his vengeance. To begin with, against those first term appointees Trump thinks betrayed him. Former Attorney General Bill Barr, former Chief of Staff John Kelly, former Joint Chiefs Chair General Mark Milley, and others who opposed his attempted seizure of power. Then comes filing charges against Joe Biden and his family with the substance yet to be determined. To this end, Trump is assembling a cadre of lawyers, I think that's a joke, that term, who supported his attempt to cling to the presidency and who won't be deterred from doing his bidding as those wusses from the Federalist Society were by the Nazi niceties of constitutional law. A leading figure among these l'états say Trump, that is, the state is Trump, translation from the French. Legal Eagles is Jeffrey Clark, the Trump Justice Department official who, during the plot to overturn the 2020 election, countered a White House counsel's argument that Trump's putsch would lead to, quote, riots in every major city by noting, quote, that's why there's an Insurrection Act, a law that allows the president to deploy the army to quell protests. That exchange is quoted in the federal indictment of Trump for fomenting the January 6th insurrection. The Post indicates that Trump is plotting to invoke the Insurrection Act on the first day of his presidency, January 20th, 2025. At a recent campaign event in New Hampshire, Trump stumbled into a rationale for going after Biden should he win the 2024 contest. Quote, This is third world country stuff. Okay, arrest your opponent, unquote, Trump said. And that means I can do that too, unquote. If nothing else, that quote explains why Trump is seeking more lawyers like Jeffrey Clark. The Clark's current ambit isn't confined to Mar-a-Lago. He's also part of Project 2025, which is an initiative of the right-wing Heritage Foundation, which in collaboration with over 80 other far-right groups, including the Center for Renewing America, where Clark is a senior fellow and director of litigation. Clark is laying out the tasks and recruiting the candidates that the next Republican president must employ to de-wokeify America, banish liberalism, and extirpate modernity. When the Post reported that Clark is leading a study on how to implement the Insurrection Act, a Heritage Foundation official quickly sought to assure the wider world that, quote, there are no plans within Project 25 related to the Insurrection Act or targeting political enemies. Oh, really? Says Harold Morrison. Earlier this year, Project 25 published a 920-page manifesto called Mandate for Leadership, the Conservative Promise, laying out its agenda for Trump or any other Republican who should win the White House. The book consists chiefly of the world's longest enemies list, with detailed instructions on how to target them, oust them, and reverse their policies, both real and imagined. I've read every damn page of that book. Here's what it says. This is not the first time Heritage has sketched out a blueprint for a conservative presidency. In 1980, the think tank aided another neophyte politician with the revolutionary aspirations, Ronald Reagan, with a report also called A Mandate for Leadership that stretched to 1,100 pages and covered virtually every nook and cranny of government. Heritage boasts that Reagan took up the majority of their proposals, including the across-the-board tax cuts, Star Wars missile defense, inner-city enterprise zones, and a hard line with the Soviet Union. On the latter, Heritage claimed that Reagan sticks so closely to the Heritage suggestions that Gorbachev complains to Reagan about Heritage's influence in the first few minutes of the 1986 Reykjavik summit, unquote. A subsequent edition of Mandate for Leadership has been produced for every presidential election since 1980. This iteration, very much in the spirit of Trump, is lighter on policy and heavier on retribution. Its enemies list begins with the usual targets of right-wing ire: welfare recipients, lazy and liberal civil servants. Since they're liberal, one might think Heritage would be heartened by their laziness. Anti-business regulators, environmentalists, and union bosses, but it expands from there to include more bêtes noires, scientists, woke bureaucrats, woke educators, woke diplomats, woke generals and admirals, woke G-men, and anyone who doesn't indulge the next Republican president's every whim, an adaptation to the likelihood of a Trump nomination. The particular frustrations Trump encountered when federal employees pushed back at his more long-headed notions loom large in Heritage's assessment of the federal workforce, which the book had described as, quote, largely underworked, overcompensated, okay, and unaccountable. Yeah, the damn people can't even live in the Washington area. Too expensive. No matter what department or agency is under discussion in this volume, their officials and employees' adherence to the president's policies and peaks should be their primary, if not only, task. When dealing with the State Department, the book advises, quote, the next administration must take swift and decisive steps to reforge the department into a lean and functional diplomatic machine that serves the president, unquote.
Can I eat them thing for 1 minute?
Sure. If that requires a purge, so be it. The authors advise the incoming administration to identify and interview every Treasury Department official who participated in its DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion activities and programs, and make such activities per se grounds for termination of employment. In a 900-page book, I thought he said it was 960 pages. That's a good deal more than 900 pages. One occasionally encounters boilerplate affirming the importance of hiring qualified experts. Oh, you mean people as well qualified, okay, as Aileen Cannon, right? The judge who's serving in the documents case, the classified documents case, writing about the CIA. She's so incompetent, it's painful. One author, apparently on autopilot, says the administration must avoid selecting intelligence leaders, quote, for their policy views or political loyalties, unquote. But when fully conscious of who he's advising, he gets down to the real stuff. Quote, the president-elect should choose a deputy director who, without needing Senate confirmation, can immediately begin to implement the president's agenda, unquote. That last part is critical. For Project 2025, speed is at a premium lest career officials persist in doing their jobs. Besides, a Democratic Senate or even a Senate with a narrow Republican majority may resist approving a number of Trump's more outrageous appointments. Jeffrey Clark as Attorney General, maybe Michael Flynn running defense. All the more reason why deputy directors who don't need Senate confirmation should take power immediately to begin Trump's war on his so-called, quote, vermin, unquote. Yes, the vermin. Waiting for Senate confirmations, some of which is still pending for the Biden administration nearly 3 years into his presidency, does not align with this wholesale takeover of government. And this is where Heritage's knowledge of the Federal Vacancy Project becomes useful. Under the Federal Vacancies Reform Act, for most federal agencies, a vacancy at the top means that the next available deputy becomes the acting head. Project 2025 sees a path to manipulating this law to ensure loyalists take control. Quote, when a career employee holds a leadership position, unquote, explains Ken Cuccinelli, the former acting deputy Homeland Security Secretary under Trump, and a notoriously authoritarian conservative from Virginia. That's how come I know who he is. Quote, that position should be deemed vacant for line of succession purposes, and the next eligible political appointee in the sequence should assume acting authority, unquote. Other authors call for political appointees to be put into the line of succession directly, quote, selected by the president-elect's transition team, unquote, and, quote again, in place the first day of the administration. This gambit would hand over the administrative state to those dedicated to crushing it. That would combine with the restoration of Trump's October 2020 Schedule F order, which would assign up to 50,000 civil service workers with a designation that robs them of employment protections, making them easier to terminate. So the leadership of executive agencies would be filled by ideologues, and many bureaucrats under their care could be fired at will. Republican candidates have warmed to this vision. Vivek Ramaswamy has said that if elected, he would fire more than 75% of the federal workforce and disband such agencies as the Department of Education, the Food and Nutrition Service, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and the FBI. Well, I don't know whether Trump would do exactly the same thing, but I have to make the comment at this point that before, I forget what the year was, I think it was 1888 or 1884, the passage of the Pendleton Act, which created the civil service we know today. Before that time, what governed federal employment was something called the spoils system. Under the spoils system, the president had authority to appoint everybody. And so, of course, the president would appoint people who were favored by those who helped to get him into office. The whole federal government was filled with people who owed loyalty personally to the president. We've tried this. It doesn't work. It's the perfect environment for total corruption. Because the president can corrupt everybody in the civil service, in the federal government, in the executive branch with this kind of system. Now, of course, Project 2025 doesn't go quite that far. Only 50,000 such people would be hired. But their behavior, of course, would affect all the rest in the federal system if it became easier to file the civil servants, as well. We know that doesn't work because it was the way things operated in the early history of the Republic. And there was a reason why the Pendleton Act was passed, which provided for a non-political civil service. Now we've relaxed that, in these days. There's far too much politics in the civil service. But there is absolutely no justification for making the same mistake twice, for going back to the spoil system, for going back to the kinds of corruption that was rife during the 19th century involving the federal government. Of course, that's the kind of corruption that Trump automatically wants, because he's always making to look deals for himself and his family that are going to enrich himself and his family. That's what he was about during his first term, and his second term is going to be that on steroids. Going on. In short, Heritage's directions for day one presidential appointments come straight out of Macbeth's musings as he ponders the timing of his imminent murder of Duncan, his king. If it were done when 'tis done, then 'twere well it were done quickly. The Republican need to banish the ostensibly woke is nowhere clearer than in Heritage's agenda for the armed services. Picture Senator Tommy Tuberville, a Republican of Alabama, and his viewpoints, such as they are, only inside the Pentagon. Project 2025 sees a Defense Department that has emphasized leftist politics, over military readiness, and makes an impassioned plea to DOD to eliminate Marxist indoctrination. You didn't know that all recruits are required to read Volume 3 of Das Kapital? Well, I didn't know that either. I didn't know they were required to read Volume 1 or Volume 2 of Das Kapital. I don't think they are. I don't think they do. I don't think they can even spell Das Kapital. At least by memory, they would probably misspell it. As Heritage sees it, the military stinks from the head down. Well, I'm not about to deny that, but I don't think it has to do with the fact that the military has been corrupted by a bunch of flaming liberals. Quote, most officers below the rank of general or admiral continue to be patriotic defenders of liberty, unquote. Oh, does that include the colonels, fella? They affirm. But those generals and admirals, boy, oh boy. Accordingly, Heritage advises the National Security Council to rigorously review all general and flag officer promotions to prioritize the core roles and responsibilities of the military over social engineering and non-defense matters, including climate change, critical race theory, and many more. Hal Myerson says, this amounts to providing an ideological test for the military leadership. I agree. That is what those words really mean. And I'm not defending here the military hierarchy. I generally agree with the kinds of criticisms that Colonel McGregor has been making, the military. I think he knows what he's talking about. And that implies that there might be a rigorous review of all general and flag officers. But it should be a review for competence, not an ideological test, for military leadership. You know, the stalwart defenders of traditional American values that Heritage thinks have gone awry are the Justice Department and the FBI in particular. Sinister Attorney General Merrick Garland, he who did not have the guts to press the prosecution of Trump from the first when he was appointed. But anyway, they lament, has, quote, devoted unprecedented resources to prosecuting American citizens for misdemeanor trespassing offenses. Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but prosecuting them for misdemeanor trespassing offenses isn't necessarily wrong as long as they're not making felonies out of those offenses, is it? Should we ignore misdemeanor trespassing offenses? I mean, if we ought to ignore those, why aren't we ignoring those when it comes to the students who are being charged with trespassing? Which sounds a lot like a complaint against the prosecution of the January 6th insurrectionists, says Hal Myerson. Worse yet, Justice also sued multiple states regarding their efforts to enhance election integrity, unquote, which of course refers to the state's efforts to suppress voting. Sounds to me those were good activities of justice also, because there were efforts to suppress voting. We know that. There were efforts in the primaries, there were efforts in the generals, and they generally focused on suppressing voting in minority districts of various kinds. We've already seen that conservatives want the power to shape Justice Department discretion on who to prosecute. But according to the Heritage book, the president should also be able to, quote, terminate, unquote, FBI investigations and activities that are, quote, contrary to the national interest. Who is charged with determining what's in or contrary to the national interest? I assume who is charged with doing that is the president. They don't say it, but you can take a guess. The president, as long as they're a Republican. But they don't want it to happen if the person who's determining what the national interest is the Democratic president, of course. They're complaining about that all the time. Virtually every chapter of Mandate for Leadership comes with suggestions for privatizing governmental functions, deregulating industries, or just plain helping corporate America make more money. Some of these would require congressional sign off, a bold break from Heritage's main preoccupation with centralizing power. Uh, um, Heritage recommends lowering the corporate income tax to 18% and the tax on capital gains and dividends to 15%. As for those employers foolish enough to provide their employees with not just wages but benefits, Heritage suggests changing tax laws that those employers can deduct no more than $12,000 in an employee's benefits from their taxes. So, of course, the medical benefits they would provide won't be able to meet the cost of medical benefits these days. So nobody's going to have good health insurance from their employers anymore. All the more reason for passing Medicare for all, so employers don't have to provide any of that kind of benefit. That, of course, could hold down employer expenses on benefits, a boon for employers, if not for their workers. Each Chamber of Commerce should require a 60% supermajority for any tax sites Heritage proposes. By the way, there's a similar requirement in California, though I think it's a 66% supermajority in California, which, by the way, has led to the state not being able to do the things that it has to do. It has led to deterioration in the government of California because they can't pass any measures that require raising taxes. That is already practically in place for the Senate, thanks to the filibuster, but this supermajority would extend to the House too, and only for taxes. Not for something such as military spending, of course. Project 2025 further calls on Congress to repeal the Federal Reserve's mandate to promote full employment. Inflation reduction, no matter how many Americans it throws out of work, is what matters. But also, the assumption here is that the way you do inflation reduction is by the Federal Reserve raising interest rates. And we know that that doesn't reduce inflation because we've seen them go up and up and up and up now. And guess what? It wasn't their activity that's been bringing inflation down. Inflation has been caused by price gouging and by supply chain disruptions. Those were the two primary causes, altogether responsible for something like 60 to 75% of the inflation we've had. If anything, the Fed's raising interest rates has resulted in slowing down inflation reduction because the greater payments of interest to private sector people have resulted in larger federal deficits, thus stimulating the economy and keeping it strong. going forward. The chapter devoted to the Defense Department suggests ending congressional review of arms sales to foreign countries, which hit an all-time high in 2018 when Trump was president of 56 billion. That's great, of course, for the military-industrial complex. The to-do list for transportation calls for privatizing the TSA, to quote, bring private sector know-how to government programs, like presumably the airline's expertise in passenger boarding and seating. But these are by and large wish lists. The proposals for economic regulations, which the next Republican president's new team of functionaries will carry out themselves, reveal the deeper dangers of the agenda. On the perennial area of Republican expertise, health insurance, Heritage suggests that the government should make the Medicare Advantage the default enrollment option for people getting into the system so that private health insurers can make more money and seniors' health care options can be limited. That could be accomplished by the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. Well, I have personal experience in how that works because Kaiser stopped selling its Medicare Cost Plus program, the Medicare Plus program 3 years ago, and required all the Medicare people who wanted to stay at Kaiser to enroll, in the Medicare Advantage program. As some of you know, Bonnie has had hip surgery very recently. That's not the most serious surgery that we have had on our Kaiser insurance. We've had, prior to that, 3 surgeries that were serious. And the balance bill we got out of each of those surgeries where the total cost of the surgery supposedly were $80,000. At the end of that, because we had straight Medicare coverage, the balance bills we got totaled something like $100. $100 balance bill, on an $80,000 procedure. That's what we got with our previous coverage. This is the first time we've had, our Medicare Advantage coverage. For that, our bill, which was the retail value of that bill was $60,000, and we got a balance bill of $1,125, which of course we can ill afford being on a fixed income, of course. So that right there was a big difference between the Medicare Plus coverage and the Medicare Advantage coverage. I've been waiting for something like that to happen. But at the time when we were, I say, forced into us because, we didn't want to leave our Kaiser coverage. All our doctors were with Kaiser. Our history was with Kaiser. They knew what was wrong with us. There was the potential for error was much less if we stayed with Kaiser than if we went somewhere else. So we stayed with them. But I've been waiting for this kind of thing to happen. I knew it would sooner or later because, of course, I know the way Medicare Advantage works. So our balance bill in this case was 10 times more than it was in the other 3 cases of major surgeries that we've had to cope with. Just saying. But now, of course, it would be the case that everybody would be not forced into, but the default enrollment option would be a Medicare Advantage program for them. Heritage also requests a regulatory change to Medicaid copayment levels so that recipients are required to pay for the services they receive, quote, at a level that is appropriate to, unquote. You think it's going to say, quote, appropriate for the ability to pay? Well, no. The sentence actually concludes, appropriate to protect the taxpayer. Of course, we know that the funding of the federal benefits has nothing to do with protecting the taxpayer, because the money is always newly created by the Federal Reserve. But of course, the Heritage Foundation doesn't know that or pretends not to know that. And most of the members of Congress don't know that or pretend that they don't know that. As for student loan recipients, Heritage wants the government to phase out income-driven repayment plans that hold repayment levels to a percentage of the payer's income. The Education Department created those programs and could also dissolve them. So there you go. It's going to be terrible for student loan people. Heritage also has some suggestions for regulatory enforcement agencies. It calls for a limit on the amount of time the Securities and Exchange Commission can spend on investigating financial chicanery for 2 years. So they would only have 2 years to go after a Donald Trump, for example. That may need congressional authorization, but a loyalist at the SEC could initiate that as a norm by themselves. And there are admonishments to agencies like the Commodity Futures Trading Commission and the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau to simply cease making rules. Much of what the new conservative leadership will do with these enforcement agencies is to give the impression of being busy without doing anything at all. Quote, the Biden administration's climate fanaticism will need a whole of government unwinding, unquote, Heritage tells us, and proceeds to explain how that can be done. First, they want Congress to repeal the Inflation Reduction Act's tax credits for clean energy companies, a rare example of a conservative endorsement of tax increases. But the real agenda here is ensuring that climate change deniers are appointed to the relevant agencies. To that end, Heritage suggests reforming EPA's Science Advisory Board, quote, to ensure independence, balance, transparency, and geographic diversity, which are all admirably creative euphemisms for climate deniers. Just in case EPA scientists persist in mapping out the planet's future, the administration should revive Trump's ban on the use of cumulative impact analysis in assessing environmental risks, and just to snuff out any further resistance to the president's mandates, the administration should impose a rule on EPA that it, quote, will not conduct any ongoing or planned science activity for which there is not clear and current congressional authorization, unquote, inquiry. Inquiry itself, then, is banned. In its current state, our science, American science, is just too woke, which in this case means too empirical for Republicans. Quote, the national labs, unquote, Heritage laments, are, quote, too focused on climate change and renewal technologies, unquote. The Office of Oceanic and Atmospheric Research is a, quote, source of much climate alarmism, unquote, and thus should be downsized. This plan, folks, is going to kill us all. You can see that. It's going to kill us all. Getting scientists out of the policy business is the overriding goal of any incoming Republican administration. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and National Institutes of Health are primary anti-Fauci targets of Heritage Ire. They are, quote, the duo most responsible, along with President Biden, for the irrational, destructive, un-American mask and vaccine mandates that were imposed on an ostensibly free people. Maybe so, but most of those mandates were imposed on an ostensibly free people by Donald Trump, if I recall, when he was the president. The CDC, in whatever reduced form it may continue to exist, quote, should have severely confined ability to make policy recommendations. I don't want to be seen here as someone in total defense of the CDC. I largely accept the kinds of criticisms of the CDC we hear from Robert F. Kennedy, in fact. But I think the way to reform the CDC is by improving its regulatory performance, not by defunding it, by seeing to it that people, anti-science people like Fauci, have no place in the CDC. But do not let it be said that Project 2025 rejects all critical research. The book stresses that the CDC should, quote, fund studies into the risks and complications of abortion. The incoming Republican president, Heritage makes clear, should not be daunted by the public's overwhelming rejection of Dobbs' decision and support for abortion rights. Department of Health and Human Services, quote, must ensure that all HHS programs and activities are rooted in a deep respect for innocent human life. How about for the human life of the innocent mothers, folks? And like that federal judge in Texas, do what it can to ensure that mifepristone, the abortion medication, is made illegal. It should also withhold Medicaid funds from states that require insurers to cover abortions. These could all be carried out by the administrative state. Republicans, Heritage makes clear, should put Christian nationalism at the center of policy and statecraft. On matters of LGBTQ rights and gender identity, the government must uphold the right of religiously inspired bigots to violate civil rights laws by denying services to those whose practices or identities offend them. In its discussion of the nation's Middle East policy, Heritage avers that, quote, special attention must be paid to the challenges of religious freedom, especially the status of Middle Eastern Christians and other religious minorities. As the Palestinians, Heritage policy brief is brief indeed. In its entirety, it reads, the Palestinian Authority should be defunded. Even before the current war, this pouring of oil on fire was as idiotic as it was callous. When it comes to encasing bigotry in policy, Heritage gives the next Republican president a lot of leeway. The president should give the HHS secretary the power to deny admission at the border or ports or airports to, quote, persons from such countries or places as he or she shall designate to avert or curtail mass for curtailing of immigration. That would seem to encompass, for instance, Trump's ban on immigrants from, quote, Muslim countries, unquote, that he sought to establish as president, which he has vowed to bring back and expand. Next time, says Heritage, the president should stipulate that such orders, quote, shall not be subject to the requirement of the Administrative Procedures Act. Now, there's quite a tell. The Administration Procedure Act establishes the procedure for creating regulations with a public comment period in compliance with various guidelines. It has typically been something that bogs down regulation, which Heritage would usually appreciate. But for regulation that Heritage wants implemented, it sees a way for the chief executive simply to unilaterally suspend administrative procedure. This would invite a court challenge, but you may remember the state of the Supreme Court, which hangs over this entire project as a reminder of how much easier it may be to enact this radical agenda. A few of Heritage's suggestions evoke simpler solutions for earlier time, such as linking the value of the dollar to the gold that government holds, or at least once held in its vaults, a policy that ensured long and severe depressions throughout the 19th century. But the complexities today have required Heritage to acknowledge that there's not yet a consensus on the right on several key policies. And when it can't lay down the line of what conservatives should do, Heritage lays down two lines and lets conservatives pick one and try to muddle through. What to do about the war in Ukraine, for instance? Heritage presents an argument for continuing U.S. aid and another for stopping U.S. aid. On the question of free trade, the right's unified opposition to China has been a major factor behind the critique some have leveled at the global investment and global dependence of American corporations and banks. That critique is fully voiced in a chapter by Trump trade counselor and fellow election denier Peter Navarro, in which he also documents the damage that offshoring has visited on American workers. So Navarro's arguments are countered in another chapter by Kent Lastman, who not only argues for limitless free trade, but also makes clear his opposition to including any labor or environmental standards in trade accords. One of the good things about the first administration was the guy who he appointed as the special trade representative, who was responsible for revising the NAFTA Act. Okay. He put in someone who cared about getting rid of the interstate dispute settlement provisions in trade deals, which actually severely restricted the sovereignty of the United States. So in redefining NAFTA, he got rid of those provisions. That was a very good thing. Whether the same guy is going to be appointed by Trump again, okay, I don't know. But that was just about the only good part of the Trump administration. Anyway, in the book section on antitrust policy, we could have ISDS coming back under Trump because he doesn't know what he's doing in that area. In the book section on antitrust policy, two opposing views are presented within the same chapter. Most of the discussion follows the pro-business conventional wisdom as propounded by Robert Bork, he who was borked. That concentration is fine, so long as it doesn't raise the prices consumers must pay. But the author also acknowledges that, quote, many large U.S. corporations are earning substantial incumbency rents, unquote. It frets about the undue market power exercised by platform monopolies. Indeed, he actually faults the Obama administration for opting not to prosecute Google in 2013 for its monopolization, of the search function. So at least there's some common sense in Project 2025, isn't there? Even the chapter on labor and collective bargaining rights, to which almost all Republicans remain unalterably opposed, contains some blips of pro-worker sentiment. Chapter's author acknowledges some input by Orrin Cass, who heads up the GOP's small and relatively pro-worker wing. This may explain why it includes a debate on repealing the Davis-Bacon Act, which has required the payment of prevailing wages to workers on federally financed projects, rather than just a straight call for termination. Astonishingly, there's one suggestion, surely from Cass, that unions should have the right to get court injunctions, 10J injunctions they're called, to require employers to immediately rehire workers they fired in the midst of an organizing campaign. That puts Heritage in line with Biden's National Labor Relations Board, the NLRB. That's interesting. Alas, most of the chapter calls for reversing gains that workers have only begun to make at Biden's NLRB and Labor Department. Heritage wants to limit the number of workers eligible for overtime pay, relieve corporations of liability for violations of workers' rights and that their franchisees may make, and insist that corporations are independent contractors, that workers are independent contractors, not employees entitled to certain wages and benefits if their employer says so. Workers should not be able to win union ratification if a majority sign affiliation cards. They should be given a seat on publicly traded corporate boards, but only if it's not voting. I term that non-codetermination, or simply a device enabling workers to determine nothing at all. Perhaps worst of all, Heritage suggests a new law that permits states to get waivers from the National Labor Relations Act for a 5-year period in which they can try to demonstrate that their workers will feel just as well without a right to bargain collectively as with it. Finally, there's one proposal that nicely mixes Christian nationalism with better pay for workers, requiring employers to pay time and a half to workers who they compel to work on the Sabbath. If your off days normally come in the middle of the week and you're compelled to work on one of them, looks like you're denominationally out of luck. Mandate for Leadership is more than the book. It's a recruitment poster. Its organizers want to attract like-minded conservatives into Washington with the promise of political appointments. Quote, people need to lay down their pools and step aside from their professional life and say, quote, this is my lifetime moment to serve, said the director of the project, Paul Dans, to the AP, that's the Associated Press. Project 2025 even ran a booth at the Iowa State Fair looking for recruits. It concludes with an afterword by Ed Fulner, Heritage's founder, who briefly runs through its previous editions and notes that Ronald Reagan implemented almost half of their recommendations in his first year as president, while Trump implemented 64% in his first year. So those who say that Trump is not likely to implement that he didn't write it, that it's entirely that in his first term he implemented 64% of the suggestions, okay, from Heritage. What Fulmer doesn't note is how autocratic, theocratic, and downright unhinged the current edition is when compared to its predecessors, but in that it merely is tracking the descent of the entire Republican Party. Well, that was a very, very good review of what's in it, and a very, very good review of what we may find actually passed by a new Trump administration. Of course, this critique was written by a Democrat, okay, and a labor guy who is certainly a Biden supporter now. So we come up against the dilemma, which is to say, with all the crappy things the Republicans want to do, by the way, that book was only 920 pages, so 900 pages was a decent approximation. It wasn't 960 pages, as I thought. So I correct that, but I also want to point out that off this, it would seem that anybody but a rich capitalist or business person who reads this would certainly think, for ordinary people, it would be absolutely, positively stupid to vote for any Republican candidate, including Donald Trump. However, we certainly can't vote for a party and for a president that is complicit in genocide in Gaza. So we're back to the unacceptable choice. Fortunately, none of these heritage recommendations are likely to be implemented by Jill Stein. So there is somebody to vote for. And I have to say that probably neither Robert Kennedy or Cornel West is likely to implement any of them either. But of course, of the three right now, I think Jill Stein is probably the leading candidate for president because Robert Kennedy has too many terrible positions to make him, an acceptable candidate. He just came out with another email today saying how important it was to do something about the national debt. So he continues to voice the craziness of the debt terrorists in the Peterson Foundation. As the weeks go by, I have less and less respect for the intellect, of that man. I did plan to go into a second article on this, but I'm going to have to hold this off. I've been going on for too long, and I need to get over to Dee's show if she has a show. So let me see if she has one first. If she doesn't have one, then I don't have to worry about it. But let me see if she has a show. Well, I don't see an announcement of the D show right now. Maybe I'm missing something. Yeah, maybe I'm just missing it. He says no 9 p.m. show tonight. So I am not limited, then I will go on with what I plan to do. So that's fine. So the second article on Project 2025 is a much more recent article, and it takes a very different tack. In other words, emphasizing the fascist element, in all this, a lot more than Meyerson's article. This one is by Jerry Harris. It came out of Convergence. I picked it up at Portside. Title is The Right Reads Gramsci, Project 2025, and Neo-Fascism. The tagline is, we need to understand fascism as a dynamic and revolutionary movement. It is not a conservative political force safely embedded in U.S. institutional power. It has a radical vision of power and reconstruction that Project 2025 gives voice to. And there's a picture of urban destruction on here. May come as a surprise, but the right has been studying the work of Antonio Gramsci. He was an Italian political theorist who, among others, inspired actually Benito Mussolini, but his ideas have been used by the left, okay, as well. Made a big impact on the right in this country. They concluded the left has been following Gramsci's lead ever since the Cultural Revolution of the 1960s captured the press, the universities, civil society, and most government institutions. To counter that, they've built their own media and think tanks, cultivated an institutional base in Christian churches, developed a narrative focused on attacking abortion rights, LGBTQ plus rights, immigrants, and the civil rights advances since the 1960s. This, quote, war for the soul of America, unquote, is central to Project 25's, quote, mandate for leadership report, which presents a blueprint for MAGA and a strategic plan for the use of power should Trump win in 2024. According to its logic, left-leaning elites who promote human rights, racial justice, gender equality, and environmental protections are enemies of the people. That is, the hard-working white Americans for whom the ruling elites show contempt. Referencing Gramsci, the report states, quote, the long march of cultural Marxism through our institutions, boy, is that bullshit, cultural Marxism, has come to pass. There was cultural Marxism at Columbia, right? Which explains why the president called the police. Through our institutions has come to pass. The federal government is a behemoth, weaponized against American citizens and conservative values, which is, by the way, why corporations almost always get their way, right? With freedom and liberty under siege as never before. Anyone who adheres to leftist ideology is a member of this elite, dominating most major institutions of American life, the media, big tech, education, and, quote, nothing less than a counter-revolution will save, okay, the nation. Yes, all these institutions have been so left-wing that every time a socialist country arises, okay, in another country, the CIA attempts to undermine it and overthrow the government. This has been going on for as long as I've been alive. Well, at least as long as the end of the World War II period. Let's put it that way. Not quite as long as I've been alive. Gramsci explained how leading elements of the capitalist class built hegemonic blocks to create a ruling consensus. Hang on a second while I take some pills, please. The bloc establishes commonly accepted forms of accumulation and political rule, as well as cultural and ideological domination, or ideas that become accepted as common sense, quote unquote. The main components are accepted by both major political parties. Well, yeah, the Republican Party is full of leftist ideas, right? Although there may be policy differences that exist within the scope of the broad consensus, the bloc, essentially a coalition of ruling class factions, forms a mass base by both repressing the opposition and creating political support among other sections of the population. They build that support mainly by using the tools of culture and ideology to support their political and economic project. But economic success and stability also plays an important role. From about 1932 to today, there have been two major hegemonic blocs in the U.S. The first was the Keynesian bloc, developed during the Roosevelt administration, which lasted into the late 1970s. It included social welfare, the acceptance of unions and civil rights reforms for women and people of color, also measures to raise living standards, an economically active state sector, nation-centric economics, repression of the left, building the military-industrial base, and imperialism abroad. Yes, it was replaced in the 1980s by neoliberalism, which included the globalization of production, vast cross-border financial flows, broad-scale attacks on unions, precarity, deindustrialization, undermining the social contract, free market ideology, expanding the military-industrial complex, and imperialism, while militarizing policing and promoting the carceral state. Ruling class splits. The deep economic crisis of 2008 began to unravel the neoliberal hegemonic bloc. A rapidly growing crisis of legitimacy disrupted politics, with social movements developing to the left and right. Significant sectors of the ruling class concluded they needed to form a new consensus to stabilize capitalism and reestablish political support for the system. Two different power blocs have formed, although neither yet has achieved hegemony. The neo-fascist bloc seeks stability through repression and creating a mass base through religious fundamentalism, patriarchy, and white supremacy. The neo-Keynesian bloc seeks stability and renewed political legitimacy through neo-Keynesian reformism and economic expansion through the green modernization of the means of production. Both still pursue imperialism and maintaining military dominance. This is a deep split within the ruling class over internal policies, different from the McCarthy era, in which the ruling class in both political parties were united in purging the left and expanding the U.S. empire. The current splits may be beneficial to the left in forming a common project to defend and expand democracy and protect civil society. That would entail aiming our main blow against the neo-fascist bloc, building the socialist core, and working closely with uh, progressives and pushing the center to the left. I don't know how easy that's going to be. There are numerous important issues that unite a broad array of political forces: defending abortion rights, defending the queer and trans community, expanding voting rights, which have been, of course, greatly contracting and continue to contract, teaching about institutional racism in our public schools, defending public libraries and access to books, promoting more environmental legislation and regulations, maintaining a pro-labor National Labor Relations Board, defending Social Security, and greater taxation on corporations. The list could go on. These issues encompass questions of race, class, and gender, as well as democracy. Even within this common project, socialists need to maintain independence and initiative, particularly in imposing in opposing U.S. imperialism. So this is what Jerry Harris is suggesting, but looks like he wants to go even further than the neo-Keynesian bloc. The movement behind Trump is a coalition of reactionary and conservative forces. Its major organized elements are Christian nationalists, reactionary Catholicism, laissez-faire capitalists like the Koch network, tech but libertarians such as Peter Thiel and Elon Musk, right-wing think tanks, and neo-fascist militias. It's important to see beyond Trump and understand the social political movement which is gathered around him. This movement desires to coalesce as a long-term ruling hegemonic bloc, turning the U.S. into an authoritarian Christian country, ending bourgeois democracy, and severely curtailing civil society. Project 2025, a fascist vision for the United States. Project 2025 was initiated and published by the Heritage Foundation, the most influential right-wing think tank and the one closest to the power centers of the right in the Republican Party. It has united much of the conservative movement, their think tanks, activists, and lobbying groups with the goal of installing a much more effective, more ruthless right wing regime. Comes with tremendous funding and the backing of much of the political right and believes there is a socialist plot in the highest echelons of American power. Yep, that Joe Biden, flaming socialist, that flaming socialist who paid off a lot of cronies with his infrastructure bill. They weren't, of course, socialist cronies. God. Sees a vast conspiracy with enemies everywhere, and that un American forces have. 2025 is a major policy and ideological projection. It is a fascist document and puts forward a strategic path to create an authoritarian Christian dominated society through control of the state. There are other statements from within the authoritarian bloc with somewhat different formulations and viewpoints. Project 2025 is the most developed and has been signed by over 100 groups and think tanks. They want to be the ideological and policy brain behind Trump, who is useful as a mass fascist leader but lacks the intellectual capacity to carry out a strategic project. Now, here I have to point out that he showed in his first term that he does lack that capacity, but he's also showed that when he allies himself with a particular faction in the Christian right, for example, the faction that wanted a big change in the Supreme Court, he can simply stand aside and let those people, that is, the people who wanted a particular outcome on the court, to push him around, and he would give them support and see to it that they got the three justices of the Supreme Court that they wanted. So he was manipulated by Mitch McConnell to get that thing done because that's what Mitch wanted most of all. And he even mortgaged his own interests towards the end of his stay, in the White House, to see to it that that goal, of Mitch McConnell's was accomplished without his attempting to hold that goal hostage to get a bigger stimulus bill out of Mitch McConnell at the very end of his term. He wanted a rather large stimulus check going to the American people at that time. But Mitch McConnell didn't, because, of course, he's an ideologue of the right, when it comes to economics. So Mitch allowed him a $600 stimulus check, but not a $1,200 or a $1,400 or a $2,000 stimulus check, which probably would have won Trump the presidency in 2020. Now, Trump had leverage over $600 check, which did not get him reelection to the presidency. But if you think a $2,000 check would not have done that, then I think you're sadly mistaken. That would have turned that election on a dime. Donald Trump is not part of the, quote, ruling class, unquote, a term often used by the right to describe the elite. Instead, Trump is characterized as an outsider, a business maverick who disdains elite language and the club of Washington insiders. China, globalists, political and academic elites, the left, socialists, communists for Project 2025, it is all just one enemy. Quote, today, nearly every top tier university president or Wall Street fund manager has more in common with a socialist, a European head of state, than with the parents at a high school football game, unquote. I mean, are these people kidding? Wall Street hedge fund managers like Paul Simon, okay, and some of these other cretins and creeps has more in common with socialist European heads of state? He's got to be nuts. Those hedge fund managements hate and fear the government and the socialists. I know one hedge fund manager who's a pretty decent guy, but he's the exception that proves the rule. Most of the hedge fund managers are Neanderthals. Moreover, okay, America's corporate and political elites are fully in cahoots with the nation's foreign enemies and against the quote, real America made up of humble, patriotic working families. Boy, this is a mythology. Quote, every hour the left directs federal policy and elite institutions. I don't know what that was. It was some kind of feedback loop. Were you trying to listen to me on there?
Yeah.
It created a feedback loop.
Uh-huh.
Okay, because we're on the same line.
Okay, I won't look at it.
Okay, so if you try to listen to me when it creates that kind of a sound when it loops back. Quote, every hour the left directs federal policy and elite institutions, our sovereignty, our constitution, our families, and our freedom are a step closer to disappearing. Conservatives have just one shot to get this right. With enemies at home and abroad, there is no margin for error. Time is running short. If we fail, the fight for the very idea of America may be lost. This is the last opportunity to save our republic, unquote. The solution to all the above programs is not to tinker with this or that government program to replace this or that bureaucrat. We solve them by ripping out the trees, root and branch, unquote. We need to understand fascism as a dynamic and revolutionary movement, says Jerry Harris. It's not a conservative political force safely embedded in U.S. institutional power. It has a radical vision of power and reconstruction that Project 2025 gives voice to. As Trump has stated, he plans to live the country of, quote, left vermin, unquote. Hey, I'm one of those left vermin. The right's unified plan and committed cadre. The project outlines what the right wants to do with the executive branch and the state apparatus when they return to power, immediately when they return to power. Department by department and agency by agency, including purging 50,000 federal employees, following is an examination of the project's nearly 900-page document with much of the following content based on quotes. Executing a president's agenda requires a well-conceived, coordinated, unified plan and a trained and committed cadre of personnel to implement it. Quote, we need to assemble an army of aligned, vetted, trained, and prepared conservatives go to work on day one and deconstruct the administrative state and to use the state as a tool for concentrating power and entrenching ideology, unquote. Interviews are already being conducted. Accepted are only those who agree that the 2020 election was stolen. The president's, quote, needs, unquote, quote, goals, unquote, and, quote, desires, unquote, are always consistent with the law. And the president is the, quote, personal embodiment of popular will. uh, um, 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 Mussolini and Hitler would be particularly pleased with this particular section. They certainly will be, if you think the president is the personal embodiment of the popular will. Plans to transform the state. One, purge left elites in major departments. According to the project, large sections of the State Department's workforce are left wing. Yeah, like the left wing Tony Blinky and the left wing Jake Sullivan and the left wing, well, of course, Victoria Nuland uh, has already decided, uh, has already gone, okay, to Columbia, and may very well be one of those behind the idea of bringing the police into the Columbia campus. I owe that thought to Lisa Theobald, I should say. And the Department of Justice, which oversees the FBI, quote, has been captured by an unaccountable bureaucratic managerial class and radical left ideologues who have embedded themselves throughout its offices and who are infatuated with the perpetuation of a radical liberal agenda, unquote. Two, reverse gains in gender justice. Women's and gender rights are targets that generate a particular degree of fear and hatred. Project 2025 advocates the abolition of the Gender Policy Council, and it wants to delete a host of terms such as sexual orientation, gender identity, gender equality, gender equity, gender awareness, gender sensitive, also abortion, reproductive health, uh, reproductive rights, and diversity, equity, inclusion out of every federal rule, internal agency regulation, contract grant, public regulation, piece of legislation that exists. Every U.S. state should be required to report exactly how many abortions take place, the gestational age of the child, why the abortion took place, and the mother's home residency, so the secret police can go and get her, right? And environmental justice and protection projects. When it comes to environmental science and regulation, the project takes the same extreme approach. It wants to abolish the Office of Domestic Climate Policy, the Office of Environmental Justice and Civil Rights, and the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration because it, quote, constitutes one of the main drivers of the climate change alarm industry, unquote. Goes on to state that environmental extremism serves to undermine the strength of the United States. Quote, it is not a political cause, but a pseudo religion. Talk about the pot calling the kettle black. But a pseudo religion meant to baptize liberals' ruthless pursuit of absolute power in the holy water of environmental virtue, unquote. Dismantle diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. As for confronting racial inequality and discrimination, the project wants every department, from the Department of Labor to the U.S. Agency for International Development, to be scrubbed clean of diversity, equity, inclusion. Quote, DEI, unquote, is a policy adopted by many corporations, by universities, and government agencies, and treat the, quote, participation in any critical race theory or diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives as grounds for termination of employment, unquote, as they violate constitutional and moral principles, such as the 14th Amendment. Somehow I don't think so. The government should prohibit the collection of employment statistics based on race or ethnicity. Illegal immigration should be ended. The border sealed. Furthermore, bureaucrats at the Department of Education, quote, inject racist, anti-American, ahistorical propaganda into classrooms, unquote. And, quote, critical race theory and gender ideology should be excluded from curricula in every public school in the country because they poison our children, unquote. This coincides with Trump calling immigrants, quote, animals that, uh, quote, poisons the blood of our country, unquote. Restore traditional values through state action. All policies should be guided by traditional values. According to Project 2025, the pursuit of the good life is found primarily in family, marriage, children, and above all in religious devotion and spirituality. This is serious. For those who say there is no difference between Democrats and Republicans, or that the U.S. is not a democracy, and that they were already living under an authoritarian government, please take Project 2025 seriously. Well, I gotta say straightforwardly, yeah, the U.S. is not a democracy. We're already living under an authoritarian government. But I think there's a difference between the Democrats, okay, and Republicans. But I also think that both of them need to be rejected in 2024. We've had enough of both of them. We've had enough of the inverted totalitarianism and the genocidal actions of the Democrats. And we've had enough of the Republicans and their authoritarianism and their corruption in the face of a corrupt class of oligarchs going on. We are facing a well organized, very well financed, highly motivated, and ideologically rigorous enemy. As leftists, we exist in civil society. We use the political tools of free speech, free press, free association, and the right to assemble and protest, to organize for our ideas, our cause, and to create a working class mass base. Yes. And what have the Democrats been doing to undermine that in the last weeks? What support are they giving for the political tools of free speech, free press, free association, and the right to assemble and protest? There are always tensions, also limitations and violence within bourgeois democracy. But what we have today is qualitatively different from the strategic plans of the neo-fascist movement. Oh, yeah? Oh, yeah? When was this published? Let's see. I forgot to tell you because I forgot to note it myself. April 27th, 2024. The protests had already started. And this guy has a nerve to talk about the tremendous differences. Okay, going on. We are facing a well organized, very well financed, highly motivated, and ideologically rigorous enemy. As leftists, we exist in a civil society. We use the political tools of free speech, free press, free association, and the right to assemble and protest, to organize for our ideas, our cause, and to create a working class mass base. There are always tensions, limitations, and violence within bourgeois democracy. But what we have today is qualitatively different from the strategic plans of the neo-fascist movement. There is an anti-fascist majority in the U.S., but it is unorganized, and centrist Democrats are incapable of giving it full expression or leadership. I believe the role for socialists is to unite the many and aim our main blow against the most reactionary and dangerous enemy we currently face. We need to block MAGA as a national movement over a broad front of compact as we build the capacities of left forwards to move us toward a progressive future. It's not just about a presidential election, but that is one aspect, okay, of the battle. We do need to block MAGA as a national movement over a broad front, okay, of combat. But we need to block, what shall I call it, the Bidenism, the consultative-ism of the Democratic Party, the total corruption of the Democratic Party. We need to block them both We need to get money out of politics. We need to dump the corruption. This is not just about the presidential election. That is one aspect of the battle. But another aspect of the battle is to get rid of this corrupt Congress with people in both sides bought by big interests, including most notably right now being bought, by AIPAC, and by Israel. We cannot have a nation that underwrites genocide. But going forward, and I have to talk now much more seriously, about things. When you look at Project 2025, you see how reactionary that is. You see that what 2025 is about is returning us wholly to the rule of the rich and the rule of the corporations and oppressing everyone else. Of course, the Heritage Foundation and the Project 2025 people hope to capture Trump. They will be able to capture Trump. Why will they be able to capture him? Because as long as they facilitate his feathering the nest of his family and himself while he's president, and they will do that because they're all for this idea that the president is immune from prosecution. So they will do that. And then he will play ball with them and give them what they want to do because they will be his political base. So what will happen to American society if this happens? We have now been looking at the challenges that we are seeing from the BRICS nations and from Russia and China. I want to say to start with that I am happy that BRICS has come about. I am happy they are expanding. I am happy about the Belt and Road Initiative. I am happy that finally the developing countries have hope for the future because of what BRICS is doing. But I also see a danger in this for the United States. I don't see a military danger because I don't think the BRICS nations are going to want to start wars with the United States. They're going to be too busy developing and improving the lives of their people for the next 10, 15 to 20 years. I think they'll even get engaged in the climate fight. I don't know if it'll be soon enough to save us all, but eventually they'll realize that has to be done and they will improve things. But what I fear is that under Project 2025 and the extreme amount of individualism that's going to be fostered by that we are going to see a further deterioration of the collective character of the United States as a culture where people work together to produce common goals and to fulfill the public purpose. That deterioration, we see a manifestation of that actually today in the degradation of the military prowess of the United States. We have turned over the military to the military-industrial complex for their profit. And they have put profits over readiness. They have put profits over having the manufacturing capability to counter the other great powers. I've been against, the Ukrainian war from the beginning. I didn't even want them to fight, in the Ukrainian war. So there's something good in the idea that we can't supply the ammunition and the military tools, that the people in Ukraine, that the government of Ukraine needs to defend itself, against the Russians. That's actually good, I think, in this particular historical context. But it is not good from the point of view of the degradation of the military manufacturing capability of the United States. We've been producing all these extremely expensive and highly profitable weapons that are not as good as the weapons being produced by the adversaries. Our weapons are being shown to be inferior and much more expensive than the better weapons of the other side. What kind of disaster is that? It's a disaster of management. It's a disaster of military policy. It's a disaster of foreign policy. It's a threat to national security. Our biggest advantage over some of the other nations is that our CIA is better at overthrowing foreign governments. What kind of travesty is that? Our defense industry has deteriorated, not because it doesn't have enough money, it has more than enough money. We've been outspending the Russians by 10 times, and the Chinese by more than 3 times. And the combination of Russia and China is currently militarily more powerful than the United States. That is a reality. I don't worry too much about that reality because, as I said, I don't think the Russians and Chinese are after us. I think they have bigger fish to fry. So we don't have to worry really from that point of view. But what we have to worry about is devoting our attention to creating a military industrial complex that saps the attention and energy of the country for the sake of their profits. We have an industrial policy with respect to the military industrial complex, but we don't have, an industrial policy that is one that produces social and economic process for the United States and that fulfills the public purpose of the United States. So last night, of course, I spent considerable time on Jamie Galbraith's essay on industrial policy and where we're falling short. We have no comprehensive industrial policy for meeting the climate emergency, which is threatening our very existence. Project 2025 is a death sentence for us in relation to meeting the climate emergency. It's obvious on the face of it. We can't let Trump win and start to implement Project 2025. Not only because of the inherent fascism in it, but because of the doom it represents from the standpoint of the climate emergency and the continued failure of the United States to adopt an industrial policy that fulfills the public purposes, okay, of the United States. We cannot allow Trump to win. We cannot allow Biden to win, because Biden is a regressive, genocidal maniac. We can't have any further actions of this kind. We have to dump the corruption, have to get the money out of politics, so we can pass industrial policy that builds up once again our manufacturing capability, our education, our technological capability, our capability to innovate, our capability to build a society that is rich in art and culture and humanistic activities. We need to rebuild our society across the board, and our unions too. And we need to build that through an industrial policy. We must have one. It must be based, of course, in the financial area, okay, on MMT principles. It must be based on a comprehensive idea, okay, of the public purpose. It must totally reject Project 2025, okay, and anything like it. In the foreign policy area, it must integrate our domestic needs and our foreign policy needs. There must be comprehensive planning that integrates foreign policy and trade policy with our domestic policy purposes. I wrote a book about that. It's called Who Needs Balanced Trade? Who Needs Balanced Budgets? It's a Kindle book. It's on sale for $9.99. It's cheap, but it indicates in broad outline the kind of thinking we should be doing. Joe Biden has been following a foreign policy that is totally opposed to our domestic needs. It has no integration at all with domestic needs. It's just based on the idea that the United States should be the hegemon. What does that have to do with our domestic needs? It doesn't have anything with our domestic needs. It's just a silly idea we have to be the toughest guy on the block. We don't have to be the toughest guy on the block. We should have a military, though, that's as up to date as any other military and is capable of fighting as any other military, but just for the defense of the United States. We shouldn't be using our military capacity and our intelligence capacity to overthrow the governments duly elected by other nations. And we should be collaborating in the sandbox with the other nations of the world. We need a radical change of our foreign policy, and a change that is integrated with our domestic policy. In my book, I've kind of outlined how to create that. It's not as detailed a book, okay, as I would like, but it puts forward the signposts, what's involved in this new kind of thinking of integrating domestic policy and foreign policy, and not making any foreign policy moves that are inconsistent with our domestic needs and goals. So, if you recall what I had to say yesterday about Jamie Galbraith's stuff, he was very gloomy, particularly about our capabilities to make the transition to a green United States based on renewable energy. And there were very many reasons which he cited for him to be so gloomy about that. And it became apparent, based on what he said, that if that transition was to be possible at all, it was going to be necessary to wholly change the political system, to not be subject to big money anymore, to not be subject to the oligarchy, because the oligarchy would never be in a position to support a transition that would contain the kind of development and the kind of growth we need to have to get to, yes, I'll use that cliche, a Green New Deal. We need that, okay, in the worst way. We can get there through industrial policy and the kind of thing that Jamie talks about. But we won't get there without a total transformation of the political system. So I call on everyone, as I've been calling on people since the fall of 2022, to dump the corruption and get in entirely new people in the Congress who will feel free to not pay attention to any large donors, whose place in Congress will be solely based on small donors, and who will be in a position to entertain the very good ideas about industrial policy and the transition to a Green New Deal that already exists. It's not that we're lacking ideas. I don't think it's that we're lacking technology, because I think that the lack of battery technology we have now can be developed actually very fast with the proper stimulation from public uh, um, sources, with careful planning, and with the kind of financing that is possible, but based on the MMT conceptual framework. We can, of course, have all the money we need. We can have also all the resources we need. We have to try anyway for a really rapid transition. We can't do it with the kind of political system we have now. We can only do it with a political system that will dump the corruption that is handcuffing us and keeping us tied to the neoliberal ideology, okay, in economics. That's still what we're seeing. It is the ideology, okay, of neoliberalism that is motivating the oligarchs, including the neo-fascists that Jerry Harris, okay, was talking about. We must have an end to that. That is the key to getting the industrial policy we need to have the Green New Deal that we need in order to go forward and to save ourselves and to develop the kind of society that will maximize the security and the happiness, okay, of the American people in a way that is compatible with the security and the happiness of the rest of the world as well. So, I'm now going to turn to your comments. I've been at it now for 2 hours, okay, and 11 minutes. Kind of a throwback to old times. And I'm going to go on now with your comments. Starting from about 8:26, stock is selling vitamins. Laugh out loud. Was I selling vitamins? I didn't mean to. Steve Wolfbrand says, I messaged Belana and Kay. Thank you. Steve. Kay said, hi all. But as far as, as messaging Lana is concerned, she should have gotten my tweet, okay, today. This really any different from what, okay, the Democrats are currently doing? Yes, okay, it's somewhat different, but it's more comprehensive and more systematic. But I mean, I'm not advocating for Biden in any way. I mean, Biden is totally unacceptable to me at this point. What about Biden enriching his family, Hunter and his uncle? I completely agree, Steve. Okay, and himself, I'm sure he's benefited from being in the presidency also. He hasn't been so public about it, but it hasn't escaped, okay, my notice that since he's left, when he came into the vice presidency, he was notoriously the poorest guy in the Senate for a very long time. He was worth less than $1 million. Last time I looked, he was worth more than $15 million. He developed that wealth while he was the vice president, and in the years since, he increased his wealth by 15 times. He's been enriching himself, and he's going to continue to do that. He's corrupt. I know he's corrupt. I'm not saying he's not corrupt. In any other country, major surgery is just a Thursday, no money, no worry. Well, it may not be more than a Thursday in terms of the recovery period, but yeah, it's no money, no worry, right? Yes, Jeff. Kay says, okay, I'm out of here. Love you all. I forgot you'd come on today. Hi, friends. Hi, Joepedia, says Andy Candy. Brandy says to Candy. And Brandy says, I don't think Dee is doing a show tonight. I think that's right. Andy, Brandy, thank you. Andy Candy says, hi, Brandy. Brandy says, getting the fur babies ready for bed. Andy says, I'm confused by this article. I think if that was 941, you were confused by the first of the articles on Project 2025. When the author talks about the left, sounds like he's describing the right. What am I missing? I totally misunderstood the article. I don't know what's wrong with me tonight. And Brandy says, I'm not afraid of Russia or China. I'm not afraid of Russia or China either, okay, as I said. But you can't know what the future may hold. Other countries are going to become great powers too. The history of international relations is one, okay, of national conflict. And it's a good thing, okay, to be ready. Now, that doesn't include being the hegemon. We no longer have to be the hegemon. It's not even right that we should be the hegemon. We don't have enough people to be the hegemon. There are 4 times the number of souls in China and India than there are here. It's not logical that we should be the hegemon. It's not really natural. So we need to stop trying to be that. We need to try to manage our security by being powerful in our region, by having technology that is top, both from the standpoint of scientific advancement and cost effectiveness. And it should be primarily based on defensive philosophy rather than offensive philosophy. That's actually been the case for Russia and for China. They both have emphasized, okay, the defense of our country. In Russia's case, the defense of its territory using conventional weapons. And in China's case, also the defense, okay, of its territory, trying to build a military that will make it impossible to break up China by attacking up its rivers, okay, as the West did when it basically brought China down. And China's military can do that now. It can stop threats, okay, in the immediate vicinity by anybody. And he says, Joe, the establishment is going to try to jail Jill. Shall we focus on Cornell if that happens? Well, I don't think they can jail Jill for much. In other words, they're going to try to jail Jill for assault. But we've all seen the videos. And we've all seen who was assaulting her. They can't get her for assault. That's not going to work. They won't be able to get her for other things either. I think we need to still concentrate on Jill. That's where the focus should be. Also think Jill has a damn sight better campaign manager than Cornell has. I think Jason Cole is really great. Brandy says, I don't think the charges will stick. I don't think they'll stick. And he says that 50 mil must have come from APAC in the majority. Yeah, probably. I'm so happy I still have some teeth. These lime tortilla chips from Aldi are delicious. $1.95. Okay, I tend to avoid those corn chips. I'm so distrustful of corn, that's not organic, that I just, kind of avoid that. Well, if there are any more comments, I will stay to entertain them. Brandy says, I like Jason. We have disagreed in the past, but I think he has really grown. Yeah, I don't know. I didn't find anything disagreeable about him from the past. I think he's very bright, very hardworking, and very courageous. Steve says, UCLA is poised to explode right now. I know. I know they are. In fact, I was surprised, that USC exploded first. But yeah, I know they're poised to explode right now. And I'm fearful, of the reaction by California, if they do explode. Andy says, great commentary about issues again, Joe. You have a gift for clarity. Thank you, Andy. Oh, Brandy says, when he worked on Marianne Williamson's campaign. Yeah, well, I'm glad he shifted over from Marianne Williamson's campaign to Jill's campaign. Steve Wolfbrand says, dispersal order has been issued. Students are hunkering down. Why don't some of these universities see what's happening at Brown? What happened at Brown is the administration didn't get upset at the students for the encampment. the students made a demand for the administration to divest themselves, okay, of the companies that were supporting the Israelis, that were investing in Israeli companies. So the administration made to the students the following offer. We'll put it to a vote, and we will abide by the decision of the majority. If they favor our divestment, uh, okay, of all uh, of our assets connected to Israel, we will abide by that. And that campus is now perfectly peaceful and perfectly orderly. There is no problem. They have pointed the way forward. And none of these other universities are doing that. And they're all bringing the police, they're breaking up their community, they're creating bitterness that's going to last for years. And that's going to handicap those universities for years. For years. I don't know what this is going to do to Columbia. I think a lot of the professors are going to leave Columbia. The good professors, the reasons why Columbia has been considered a great university. They'll be lucky if they retain the best ones. Of course, they'll retain Hillary Clinton and Victoria Nuland. But I don't think they're going to retain Jeffrey Sachs anymore. And there are dozens of others, extremely prominent, who won't feel comfortable staying at Columbia uh, any longer because academic freedom has been threatened. There was another article I certainly didn't have time to go over today because you see how long these two articles took. But there's an article just published in Counterpunch by Michael Hudson. It's a great piece written on April 30th, 2024. Quote, have you no sense of decency? Unquote. And then a McCarthyism returns to campus. So that is a title. And the frame he's using here is not just the attack on the students, but the attack, okay, on academic freedom, okay, on the universities. So that's how he frames this. And I think that's the proper frame. It's a very long article from Counterpunch. I don't know if I'll cover it tomorrow because I had something else in mind for tomorrow, but it's an article that just appeared and I may well cover it. Hudson, of course, is one of our greatest thinkers. He really is. His scope of thinking is not just economic, it's all of civilization and all of history. And he's making wonderful contributions as he gets older. He's in his 80s now, but he hasn't slowed down, okay, at all. I have to check that, but I'm pretty sure he's in his 80s. I kind of think he's probably almost as old, okay, as I am. He hasn't slowed down at all, though. He's still terrific. His books are still terrific. Anyway, I recommend this article in Counterpunch. I will give you the link. Perhaps I'll cover it over the next few days if there's time. I'll put the link in the chat. Most people don't even know that Michael is an MMTer. And he says, Joe, do you use the app that reads for you? No, I don't. I neither use the app that reads for me, nor do I use the app that writes for me. Andy says, as you get older, the quicker you see through BS. So that's true for some people. It's always been true for Michael, though, he could see through BS. He was really good. The good professors should start a new emancipated college free from oligarchs. They should. Maybe they should all go across town and join, the new school. They may be freer from oligarchs than any place else. I think they've always been freer from oligarchs. So maybe that's the place. Steve Wolfbrand says divestment is merely symbolic. Someone else will buy the stock. A boycott is the best strategy. Sanctions ain't going to happen with this government. Right. All the more reason why we need to get rid of this frickin' government and the other frickin' government in waiting, of course. I mean the Trump government. Brandy says, no, so far, no encampments in Arkansas. I've seen Dr. Hudson on Danny Haiphong talking MMT. Yeah, he doesn't talk MMT too often. But if you have the link to that episode on Danny Haiphong with him talking MMT, I'd like to see it. Okay, because Danny mostly doesn't talk MMT. Though I have to admit, I haven't seen him talking about taxpayer money much. And he says, that's awesome, Brandy. And he says, new school. Andy Candy says, new school with new school rules. Yeah.
I think we need new innovative inventions and things to start to rebuild the U.S.
Yes. So Bonnie says, what we need is lots of new innovation and inventions, for the U.S. Brandy says, I will look. He has mentioned MMT. Well, he's defended MMT in a number of contexts. He used to be persona grata, as opposed to non grata, at the American Monetary Institute and their conferences. And at those conferences, he got into big fights with them in relation to the MMT perspective as opposed to their own perspective. And of course, he represented the MMT group at the big conference in Italy, at Rimini. That was, I believe, in 2012 or 2013. But Michael Hudson and Bill Black and Stephanie Kelton, went over there and sat on a panel with another post-Keynesian economics, a Frenchman by the name of, I don't clearly recall his name, so I won't say it, but they were really, the Italians were really enthusiastic about the MMT ideas at that conference, as they were stated by Stephanie and Michael, and Bill Black. It was really an enthusiastic and raucous conference where the MMTers were treated like the rock stars that they are. It was an amazing conference. There are videos of it, on the web. But they packed 1,500 people into the arena, and it was It was at the time the largest of audiences the MMTers had ever had. And at the time, uh, there was also enough interest for Warren Mosler to do a tour, okay, of Italy, where he went from city to city talking about MMT. So that was exciting also. Andy Candy says, "Here, here, Bonnie." Brandy says, agree with Bonnie. And she says, "I hope Bonnie is healing well."
Thank you.
Okay, Bonnie is healing well, okay, and is very happy. She's been working on replacing the rollator with her cane. She actually started out with a cane some years ago. She had to start to use a cane because but she was having a problem with her hip, due to the fact that the synovial fluid had, gone away. So she had an extreme amount of sciatica pain. And she had to use a cane, okay, to walk. So when she had the accident that broke her hip, uh, she fell on her bad hip. Okay, and, that was one of the reasons why, okay, it broke. But following the operation, if she can get back the functionality of using the cane, she'll be back to where she started before her accident. So, yeah, she has every mark of healing very well. She has very little pain now. Usually, I'm able to remove the pain in about 15 seconds. Okay, with a muscle rub uh, that I get from one of the dispensaries around here. The active ingredient uh, in the muscle rub is THC rather than CBD. And boy, does that take away the pain fast. It is fantastic. Andy says, "Joe, I received my spy sunglasses from China that let you see behind you. They are a good example, okay, of innovation, and the images are crystal clear." She says, "Two pair, one black, one blue, $4." Hey, Andy, was that for sale uh, uh, by Timu by any chance? Brandy said, "My hips are bad, okay, for muscle atrophy. Uh, uh, atrophy. I feel her pain." Tsupani says that our chiropractor helped for some time. Okay, and she did. But I learned from our chiropractor how to pull her leg so as to create um, uh, uh, space between her hip bone, uh, 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 and the other bone there. I guess that's the femur. Uh, and that used to be very effective uh, in taking away her pain. Since the operation, I don't have to do that anymore, but she still has some pain around that area. But I can relieve that with the muscle rub, very easily. Andy asks, does Bonnie take glucosamine? The answer is yes. We take a glucosamine, chondroitin, uh, uh, the combination uh, that we get from Costco. and we both take that every day, and I'm sure that helps. And Brandy says, we use THC gummies. Yeah, we don't use the gummies. We're very careful about taking things
Externally.
internally because okay, we're on the Bredesen diet. We stick very closely to that diet. I've already lost 20 pounds on that diet, even though it's not for losing weight. Okay, it's an anti-Alzheimer's diet, but it's been very effective. Okay, in improving Bonnie's memory.
And energy.
Okay, and her energy, and reducing the inflammation she has. It's been very good for all three of those things. Okay, so generally the Bredesen diet is used with a coach. We've only been using his books, but I'm very good at following things like that. So far that's been very successful for us. I'm also a very good cook. At least she tells me I'm a very good cook. So
everybody does.
Okay, so I'll take that. Okay, and so okay, between the way I cook in order to follow the diet and the supplements we take, it's been very effective. Okay, for her, and it's been very effective for me as well. Andy says, I have hip issues and low spine issues from arthritis. Yes. And Barney and I both have arthritis too. I don't have a lot of arthritis. I have some in my hands. And I think some I get maybe a little bit in my hips, but it isn't serious yet. But sometimes I feel like I'm getting some arthritis down there. But the arthritis in my hands has almost entirely gone away since what I've been doing. Andy says, I have hip issues and low spine issues from arthritis. Yes. But Timu, my God. So that's where she got the spy glasses from.
Timo? Oh.
The spy sunglasses, okay, from Timu.
Yeah.
They were $4 a pair or $4 for two pairs, Andy. What did I get there? She also gets Dollar Tree allergy tablets. Helps with the synovial pain. It sounds like popcorn when it pops. Yeah, because there's no synovial fluid in it anymore. So, Dollar Tree allergy tablets. What are those allergy tablets chemically? Do you know? Because we have a lot of allergy tablets. We don't usually take them anymore because it seems like the Bredesen diet also takes away the allergies.
Gives you a ton of energy.
Gives you a ton of energy, but we don't seem to have allergy problems these days. Brandy says, I'm seeing an upper cervical chiropractor. Then I may go to a regular one when he gets my neck better. Insurance doesn't cover it. It is helping my headaches and migraines. I think chiropractors can be very effective. We have visited 3 chiropractors, but during our marriage, going back, I guess we must have started seeing chiropractors in the early 1980s or maybe the late 1970s. And we've been satisfied with each one. But each one has helped us with our specific problems. They've all been competent. They've all helped. It's, really been amazing.
And we expect it to be 89 tomorrow.
And we expect it to be 89 tomorrow, Bonnie says,
Yeah.
here in the Washington, D.C. area. Andy says, long live Timu. Andy says, for 2 pair, it's $4. Hey, Bonnie, we got to get that. That's absolutely.
Okay.
I want to be able to see behind me so I can watch for the pickpockets. Dihydropharamin? Is it? Hope I spelled it right. I don't know. That doesn't sound. No, I don't take them for allergies. I take them for stiffness and pain. Yeah, it's amazing they would work for stiffness and pain. Brandy says, I have arthritis from my neck to my knees, degenerative disc disease, and my C vertebra is majorly out of place. I think Bonnie has that problem, okay, with her vertebra also. Steve Wolfman, MNN, taurine, NAC, glycine. I'm going nuts with the supplements. Yeah, we take a raft of supplements too. But I'll tell you, I think they work. Um, krill oil supplements are really good for swollen feet. They take away the swelling. And turmeric is wonderful, okay, for inflammation. Some people can't take it. They have an allergy to it, okay, or negative effect. But we're lucky we're able to take turmeric. And for us, I'd say it's more effective than aspirin. It's just really good. And it's part of our diet. And we take 3 majorly turmeric uh, capsules per day as well as including it. It's included in our breakfast. It's included, okay, in our dinner most of the time. Very, very useful in my cooking. And we take it, of course, with pepper, of course, in order to absorb it. It needs pepper to absorb it. And he said, I was surprised they worked for that. They're knockoff Benadryl. I see. So Benadryl. Generally, Benadryl puts Bonnie to sleep almost immediately, knocks her out completely. So we can't really take that. Brandy says the previous ones couldn't adjust my upper back and neck, but my current one is getting my neck working. Well, that's wonderful, Brandy. That's wonderful. I'm hoping, I'm not guaranteeing this, but I'm hoping it won't be more than another 2 weeks for Bonnie to be able to use her cane again. So Brandy says, I stopped my anti-inflammatory till I get a new blood test done, but Dr. Chisholm is helping along with my heating pads. And he says, yep, make me sleep at least 12 hours just taking one. So you have a problem with them too. Steve says turmeric is the best against inflammation. Yeah, I think it is too. It's really wonderful. And he says he's much better than the rheumatologist I saw. And he says turmeric hurts my kidneys. How do you know turmeric is hurting your kidneys? And how much are you taking? Okay, I have tests. Okay, as part of the anti-cancer treatment I'm getting, I have some monthly blood tests. Okay, and I'm taking something for prostate cancer that can possibly have an effect on my kidneys. Okay, by the way, in addition to that, I'm also using a turmeric. Okay, but what I'm saying is they measure my kidney function each month, once a month. And it's completely normal in spite of all the turmeric I take and also the medication I take, okay, which is abiraterone. And he says, because every time I consume turmeric, my kidneys hurt like hell. Oh, okay. Well, you got to listen to your body. That's probably the most important thing, especially when it comes to supplements. You have to listen to your body. It's very important. Okay, folks, well, it's 10:46. So I think Bonnie and I are going to say goodnight because we still have a number of things to do. Brandy says, I am going to bed, sending love to Bonnie, okay, and everyone.
Thank you.
Steve Wolfbrand says, magnesium D3 with K2. Yeah, we take the D3 with K2. We've not been sure what kind of a magnesium supplement to take. We're inclining towards magnesium L-threonate because that also helps with cognitive function. So I'm thinking of adding that as a supplement to the D3 with K2 we take. We take about 10,000 units of D3 per day. And 100 mcg with each of the D3 capsules. And he says, I'm diabetic, so my kidneys are affected. I was unaware that if you're diabetic, that you wouldn't be able to take the turmeric. My father was diabetic, but I've never had that problem. Guess I've just been very lucky in that respect. And Bonnie hasn't had a diabetic problem either, so we're both lucky in that respect. So tomorrow, what's going to happen tomorrow? Well, what I had planned for tomorrow, oh yeah, the Federal Trade Commission did something very important. The Federal Communications Commission also did something very important. One of the good things in the Biden administration, of course, is that the FTC under Lena Khan has been great. But the latest thing they did is they introduced a new ban on non-compete contracts. And that's official now. And there's a great article by Matt Stoller on that I'm going to go over tomorrow. And there's another very good article from Common Dreams on it that I'm going to go over. And then net neutrality is coming back. The FTC, led by what's her name? I think it's Jessica Rosenworcel. Yeah, Jessica Rosenworcel. A difficult name to remember. But she's such an attractive lady that, of course, I remembered it. But she's leading the FCC now under Biden. And she recently got a majority of 3-2 on it. So the FCC voted along party lines to reclassify broadband as a public service under Title II of the Communications Act. And so that means that the net neutrality is now back. And we expect that to have an effect on internet speeds. And we expect it to be very good for people who are small, okay, on the internet. It's something that's been a long time coming because we lost it some time ago, but now net neutrality is back, and that's an important thing. So we'll be going over that also tomorrow. I haven't really decided on a title for that stream yet, but those are the 3 articles that we'll be going over. So that should be a very interesting stream. But of course, with all that's going on, with student protests, okay, and with Gaza, I may have to modify my plans for tomorrow, depending on what happens, okay, in the news. There's also been an article by Pepe Escobar that I've been waiting to get. He had this story of the Israelis sending an F-35 with a nuclear weapon but to Iran to knock out all the electrical works, okay, in Iran at the time of the Israeli retaliation, okay, against Iran. There's this story that an F-35 was sent over. Pepe had it, okay, on good authority. It's been confirmed now by 3 sources that this was done, and the only reason why it didn't happen because the plane was shot down, okay, by a Russian missile.
Oh, yeah.
But okay, he's been not threatening, but saying that he is writing, okay, a big important article, okay, on that. But he's in Brazil. He's back in Brazil, I should say, because he's actually from there. And he just published, okay, an article, which is based on the Brazil experience. It was as of May 1st, okay, it appears. But he hadn't published anything between April 17th and May 1st. And he keeps saying that this article about the F-35 is coming soon. So I've been watching for that because when it appears, it's going to be very important.
If that was shut down, could that have started a war?
No, it's unlikely, especially if it was shot down. It's unlikely. If it had succeeded, it could have. It certainly, I think, would have started, okay, a regional war in which I think the Russians would have gotten involved in defense of Iran. So that would have been a disaster. Okay. So I've been waiting for that. And when that happens, I'm going to cover it. And I'll probably find a way to cover Pepe's latest article either tomorrow or Friday. But I'm mostly focused on domestic things for the rest of this week because I did my IR show, okay, on Tuesday. The stream time tomorrow will be 8 o'clock, and the stream time Friday will be 8 o'clock. Generally speaking, my hours are regular. On Tuesday, I have a 9 o'clock show, but Wednesdays through Friday, okay, I have, okay, an 8 o'clock show. Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. And then, of course, I'm usually on Dee's shows on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, though tonight she didn't have a show, which is why my show has been so long, because I had an 8 o'clock show tonight. But I usually appear on Dee's shows once over the weekend. She's been going on Saturday, Sunday, and Monday, actually, most weeks. But I usually appear on one of those, and it's usually the Saturday night show. And if I go Saturday night, I take Sunday and Monday off usually, and then come back on Tuesday. Last week I couldn't do that because I had a family commitment on Saturday night, so I ended up going on to her Sunday show. But then I, took Monday off. So I'm pretty regular in my habits. I haven't been doing the short shows during the day I was doing for a few weeks back. And the reason for that is that, since Bonnie had her accident, I've been very much focused on helping her out. So I don't have a lot of time during the day to prepare those other shows. But hopefully soon again, I probably will have that time because once she's able to use her cane, things will be pretty much back to normal here in terms of the way we go about things. So, Andy says it was a good show again tonight. Sleep well and cuddle like there's no tomorrow. We always do that. Andy says stream time 8 or 9 tomorrow. Again, 8. Steve says good night all. Sweet dreams. Thank you, Steve. Much appreciated. Lanadell says, I was my Senate district meeting today, coming in late. We'll have to rewatch. Well, I did actually 2 articles on Project 2025. They both were good. They both were long. So you'll have a lot to rewatch on that. Then I gave commentary, which I think was very valuable. Linus says, hi, I was at my Senate district meeting, coming in late. We'll have to rewatch. Yes, because this, of course, was by your special request. And Steve O says, skeptical of that story. I hope it's not true. Steve says, true, sorry. Yeah, I'm skeptical of that story too. Scott Ritter is very skeptical of that story. And he has all kinds of good reasons related to weaponry and the characteristics of weaponry, why it doesn't sound like a very plausible story. And for me, he's kind of the expert on that subject. So usually I, simply take him at his word. He just knows so much more about the characteristics of the actual weaponry that would be used in this case. He just knew about the technical aspects of what would be necessary for this to be true, which Pepe is not, really aware of. On the other hand, though, Pepe had 3 of his usual very reliable sources saying that they had gotten information about this. So I'm waiting for his article because I know he will have something good to say, whether this happened or not, that it will be very interesting to read and very entertaining. But I agree with you, Steve. I don't believe it is true. And of course, if it's not true, it's wonderful because it will mean the Israelis did back off in face of the Iranian successes in getting their missiles through. And what that means is that we now have in the Middle East, at least with respect to Israel and Iran, we have a balance of terror, which is not likely to be disturbed anytime soon. In fact, if anything, the balance of terror, okay, is in Iran's favor, so that it would not be a good idea for the Israelis to try to attack Iran, because they now have a military advantage over the Israelis. So with that, I'm now up to 3 hours and 1 minute. It's still not my longest stream ever. I mean, when I used to go with Jamal Thomas
I hope he's all right.
and also Tim Canova, when I was working with Steve Grumbine, with his group, I would sometimes go 4 hours. Okay, and then I would really piss off everybody because they would have to watch the streams
For a couple days.
and try to break them down into shorter clips. So I had to stop those things because everybody was loudly complaining that they were too long. But those were great streams, certainly, the 4 hour streams. It just seems like everything came out in those streams. I love them. I was sorry that I had to stop them. Maybe that's what I should do, go back to 4 hour streams.
Oh, no.
Bonnie says, oh no, oh no. So I probably won't do that. Anyway, thank you all for coming, and good night. And I'll be back tomorrow night with what I said I would be back with.